It really comes down to the impact on general audience. And I want to use, to defend Kubrick a little bit, A Clockwork Orange, I think, is a really, really powerful film about an individual making a very strong character. And it raises a really, really good ethical question. Because A Clockwork Orange, if you're not familiar, it basically features these three basically sociopaths who assault people, rape people, commit all kinds of crimes. One of them eventually, obviously, gets arrested and is forced into treatment where they force him to watch these horrific images, and anything that is violent and anything that is sexual, makes him physically sick, and he's unable to function as a normal person would because he's been deemed a danger to society. So it raises an interesting question. Is it appropriate to, mentally modify a person like that because they have committed these types of crimes? And that obviously makes the film very, very deep. It makes it a very intricate film.
Very thought-provoking.
So this is a difficult thing to compare because we're basically comparing apples to oranges. We're talking about an awesome, realistic depiction versus ethical, big, grand scope questions. So, this is really highlighting the contrast of the two directors, and I think they both do each one of those at a similar level.
I think you pretty much just hit it on the head. What sums it up in a lot of ways is when you reflect on their work, you're looking at Kubrick, whose a lot of his movies weren't necessarily huge successes right out the gate, but a large majority of them have become, at the very least, cult classics. But when you look at Spielberg's much broader, albeit, approach to filmmaking, you see a lot more movies which are some being blockbusters, some being more of a dramatic, what's the word? Artistic approach. But his movies are classics.
Yeah, and
not cult classic, just classic.
Yeah, you can't argue with that.
I think that alone is the perspective that kind of says they are both great in their own right, but there is definitely one who is superior to the other.
Okay, so that's a fair point. So as far as legacy right now goes, and as far as impact goes, Kubrick certainly has the edge, and a lot of that is due to time. He was making films before Spielberg and passed away, well before Spielberg.
And would it be wrong to kind of assume that, Spielberg has taken a broad approach to things that hasn't been done before, in the sense of being able to do that many different things?
Yeah.
Whereas Kubrick, to some extent, could almost be categorized as a more specifically refined Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, I could see that argument. Yeah, it's more depth.
Yeah. It seems like he picked, that was probably a major influence for him, where he picked up and moved forward with that.
Stanley Kubrick and Spielberg are both very visual directors, but they're very visual in different ways. For example, Kubrick was very well known for his cinematography, the way he would shoot things. There's hundreds of videos on YouTube showing you the angles he shoots at, the way he moves the camera. He's very, very well known, and one of the first people to really use a lot of different types of tracking shots and racking focus. But Spielberg is big with special effects. He has films like Jaws way back, that when it came out was a lot of progress for visuals. Jurassic Park, E.T., these films are very, very, awesome, especially when they were new. People were, blown away, especially Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is all about the visuals. That is a very 100% visual
Those
film.
animatronics were phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. And Kubrick was more on the camera movement cinematography side. So who do you think is going to end up leaving more of a lasting impression on visual impact?
I'm going to go with Spielberg on this one. It seems to be a recurring theme with my approach, but when you look at Spielberg's movies, especially with Jurassic Park, even when they came out with the new Jurassic World, they made sure to do some of that movie with the traditional effects that they used in the previous movies, because a lot of people still feel like those animatronics beat CGI in a lot of aspects still.
I have trouble. There's something about the velociraptors in the new Jurassic World that just does not capture what the original raptors had in Jurassic Park. There's just something... I prefer Jurassic Park's look and feel. There's just something that is different.
And that's something where Spielberg's approach to filmmaking and his special effects, he has a very templated style that he's created for himself and he follows it.
Yeah.
Whereas Kubrick's approach to the art of filmmaking and the cinematography, that's something that's more unique in the sense that directors who will follow in his footsteps and maybe do some of the same types of movies are each going to do their own thing. They're not going to follow a template. You were even talking about, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, the director for Drive.
Oh, yeah, I can never remember his name.
But same kind of concept where it's all about the cinematography for him, not the effects. But it seems like all those guys have their very own specific way of doing it that doesn't necessarily become interchangeable.
Well, yeah, and I think that is kind of ends up being more of a point for Kubrick because, Steven Spielberg's visuals are amazing, and they certainly advance the field of special effects. Like, you can't argue that, especially Jaws. That, that was so long ago that changed things quite a bit in the visual world. But those types of visuals only really enhance a blockbuster type of movie. Having incredible visuals for Saving Private Ryan, the value in those visuals was in realism. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't like making people gasp at the sight, like not in a wondrous way. It was more in a shock and awe way. Kubrick's visuals are more subtle, but his visuals actually enhance a higher quality of movie. Like, his camera work and the way he uses his focus and all of these small but new techniques that he would use made a lot of important scenes that might be dialogue-centric much more interesting, and they added to the actual movie. Spielberg's visuals are amazing, but they only enhance a blockbuster. They only enhance a big, large scope type of film. His types of visuals are not going to enhance Schindler's List. He had talent there, and he had talent driving that story, but Kubrick shooting that type of movie translates better.
And I can see your point, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, but at the same point with Spielberg, you have visuals that are substantial, like with the red dress. And that was an incredibly significant...
Okay. Took me a second to figure out what you were talking about. You went to Schindler's List again.
That movie's phenomenal.
Yeah, that was very symbolic.
Not to mention the black and white aspect, which was a throwback and really does add to that whole...
I don't know. Those are... those are good, but those are director's choices. I wouldn't really say those are heavily impacting, the future. Whereas Kubrick's, the way he was shooting dialogue had direct influences. Like, if you look at... Drive is definitely taking influence from Kubrick. And Quentin Tarantino takes quite a bit of influence from Kubrick. The way, you can see a lot of parallels in the way that Tarantino's dialogue is being filmed. Spielberg influenced most blockbusters you see today. I mean, and, whether that's a good or bad thing is irrelevant. His influence is, you can't argue with that. But is that more important than Kubrick's ability to actually move the story forward with just camera work?
Well, then the question really comes down to what matters more in the scope of things. Something like what Spielberg does that can be created if we were to make a movie. I mean, not to say that we could do it to the level of Spielberg, but we could recreate those similar effects to an extent. Or Kubrick, his perspective on doing things and the way he shoots things cannot be replicated, but at the same point may inspire someone to do something along those lines. So
again, it comes down to two very different styles, and which one do we think is more important? Is it more important to enhance small scenes in drama, or is it more important to be able to depict a large scope film?
Well, I mean, There's no way we can really settle that. I mean, it's a matter of perspective. So I guess
That's for you guys to do in the comments. If Spielberg were to pass away in the near future,
clock's ticking, buddy.
Wrap
it up.
Would his legacy be, maybe 10, 15 years after, would his legacy be considered better than Stanley Kubrick?
Fuck yeah, it would be. You know, I've heard I'll cut that out a lot. I don't think I've seen it done.
I've cut things out, but a lot of times I think it's funny.
You rarely cut out something offensive.
Yeah, alright.